Hello, and welcome to another episode of Decentral Lounge, brought to you by GlobalStake, your institutional, truly decentralized bare metal staking service provider. Today, we are excited to have a wonderful guest on the show, Griffin Anderson, who is the CEO of Phi Labs and a core contributor to Archway. Griffin's extensive background includes roles as former head of product at Ignite, formerly Tendermint, and former senior director of product management at ConsenSys. He's also known for founding blockchain-powered accounting tools, Project Balance, and being a board member of the Accounting Blockchain Coalition. His expertise lies in consensus mechanisms and layer one mechanics, making him a notable figure in the blockchain crypto industry. Join us as we explore Griffin's journey and the innovations he's bringing to the Web3 space through Phi Labs and Archway. Griffin, we're excited to have you on the podcast today, so welcome. And if you want to just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your journey into Web3.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Jordan, for having me. My experience kind of started actually more on the fintech side of things right out of university. And then as I was working on building fintech apps, especially around the mobile space, I found it really difficult and frustrating to reach users and consumers and end users through kind of the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store and those gated stores. And at the time, I was really disenfranchised with that experience and building these dApps and going through these centralized platforms that I started to look around for alternatives. And I was very fortunate enough to kind of discover Ethereum back in 2015. Shortly after its launch, the timing kind of worked out, and I ended up reaching out to one of the co-founders of Ethereum, Joseph Lubin, and the folks over at ConsenSys, and ended up joining that company as one of the very first employees at ConsenSys. Kind of a crazy time. So I've been in the crypto space full time since about 2015. We went through, a bunch of different crazy moments on the early Ethereum side of things. The very first in 2016, I remember the summer of the very first major hack, and then what ended up becoming a hard fork from Ethereum Classic to ETH, and was on the call talking to miners all around the globe, trying to convince them to fork and move over to the new fork, basically. So I remember that experience quite vividly and going through that. I remember being involved and engaged in some of the very first DAOs that ever came about. I remember ideating and helping, different members in the community trying to figure out the standards for around NFTs and things like that. And so really just had just a crazy seed to crypto in the early days. 2017 is really where the fun began, and at the time there it was called the ICO boom, and we were flying all around the globe in different cities and talking about Ethereum and what the potential and possibilities were. So just a crazy, spent many years at ConsenSys, and then left that and helped a couple other projects out, where then Tendermint, also known as All in Bits, the private company behind Cosmos, knew I was doing a lot on the go-to-market side, on the Ethereum side, and brought me in to help drive a lot of things inside the Cosmos ecosystem. And so that's where I came in and helped play an active role, and that's where then we finally started to incubate the Archway project within Tendermint, All in Bits, and then a couple of years later spun that out and been working on that project ever since.
That is quite the pedigree. I have sitting there just thinking about all that you've been exposed to and that you've seen, and it's interesting too, just being that, Tendermint and that connection to the Cosmos SDK and how you got involved. What was it about, Archway is something that's quite unique compared to a lot of the other app chains that we already see in Cosmos. Can you expand a little bit about your vision for Archway and why you wanted to build it the way that it's currently constructed?
Yeah, so just being very active and involved early in the Ethereum space, I noticed, I kind of learned real quickly what the game was. And the game was, if you held a lot of ETH, financially you would do pretty well. And so after my time with ConsenSys, I was a bit disenfranchised, like most people kind of go through in crypto. at one point or another. And I was looking to work on and build a project for myself. And I had a couple different options. And one option was to go build a dApp or an application on top of the Ethereum space. But there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. And I knew that similar to like Web 2.0 platforms, whether you're building an iOS app on top of the Apple App Store or Android app on top of the Android Store, um, I, it didn't feel right because I knew if you believe in the FAT protocol fees as where the value is going to accrue to the L1. I knew that if I were to build an app on top of the Ethereum ecosystem, I'd be driving users and activity engagement to the Ethereum ecosystem. And the reason I got kind of disenfranchised at that moment was because I'd be bringing hopefully all this value and my resources and learning to this ecosystem, but there was nothing the ecosystem was giving back to me as a developer and stakeholder as part of the ecosystem. And that sort of kind of disenfranchised me a little bit. And so fast forward, when I got the opportunity to go build a custom blockchain specifically for the Cosmos space, one of the things and tenets we wanted to do is look at and think about how do we engage all the different stakeholders that are part of the ecosystem and allow them to get a stake in the underlying portal, allow them to basically grow with the underlying ecosystem and grow with the platform, and not allow necessarily all the value to accrue just to a few stakeholders or to a very specific platform. And so that was kind of the idea behind the Archway protocol is, can we redesign the economic incentives to include other stakeholders, whether it's dApp developers or end users that are using the applications and so forth. And that's kind of what sparked the idea of Archway, was basically just kind of going through my experiences on the Ethereum side.
And hence the tagline, capture the value you create, that Archway uses, which I love. It's so catchy. How's it been so far in terms of just the Devenue, as it's been aptly called? We see builders obviously coming there. They're starting to create powerful dApps. And so, what's it been like just being around this groundswell of these bright minds coming to the Archway ecosystem?
Yeah, there's been a lot of cool projects like Astrovault's one, and there's some teams that have been able to kind of understand the value proposition and have jumped like fully on to the project and the protocol. I don't think we've, if I'm self-reflecting a little bit, I don't think we've really done a great job at showcasing all the different unique use cases and messaging. I mean, a part of what we're trying to do is allow these dApp developers and communities to earn a sustainable stream of revenue, also known as Devenue, and be able to power their applications in more of a sustainable way without having to rely on just like a simple governance token to do so. And so today, I mean, it is working. We've given out tons of rewards. There's a few dashboards that we can link to afterwards that we'll highlight and show that. But the model gets much more interesting as the ecosystem continues to grow, because obviously the revenue is a function of the growth of the ecosystem and the total value of the ecosystem. And so as the value of the ecosystem grows, more and more revenue actually is distributed out to the dApps and the teams building on top of the ecosystem. And so I'm really excited to get to the point where we start to see that flywheel really take off. And I think today we're kind of early in the ecosystem where we're starting to see use cases use the revenue as like maybe protocol liquidity, or some teams are using the revenue to pay, the people that are contributing to a project. We've seen some projects, design it so that they can refer back to make referral systems and give it back to the end users that are using the ecosystem. But I'm really excited for some of those use cases to really start to take off, and the rewards to become more and more material for the end users and then projects building on top.
I have a question. So from an institutional perspective, as institutions are trying to figure out where they want to place their investment in certain protocols and kind of push long-term development and growth, it seems that as more and more protocols are becoming popularized, actual developers are being spread very thin, as there's not enough developers in the space. So can you kind of talk a little bit more specifically around the importance of developer incentivization in Web3? And specifically why Archway is beating a lot of others?
Yeah. So today, right now, block space is becoming commoditized across the space right now. There's a bunch of there's probably a lot more available block space than there is like dApps and developers and transactions that are using up the block space. You also see, even though you have a bunch of different protocols, it definitely doesn't feel like winner's going to take all, but all these projects are kind of competing on the same variable. They're trying to compete on, let's say, being the fastest blockchain or highest integrity or most decentralized. But what we're starting to see is like all the things that kind of separated these different blockchains and the issues that we had encumbered on the Ethereum side in the early days is becoming kind of like a commodity at this point. Everybody's going to be very, very fast. In the coming years, every blockchain is going to be probably sub-second block processing speed. There's going to be privacy available to everybody and different things. And so you have to start as an L1 or as a general purpose blockchain, you have to ask yourself, like, what are you going to do to create customization for the end users? How are you going to beat out all the other L1s that are commoditizing block space, especially when a lot of the tech gets, spread out pretty quickly across the board very, very fast. And so what Archway does is says, well, one of the things we're pioneering is like, if a dApp developer has a choice between building on a blockchain that just processes their transactions and choosing to build on one that actually like pays them and gives them revenue for their transactions, we think most often than not, the dApp developer is probably going to favor and pick the one that actually like pays them and gives them revenue sharing versus the one that doesn't. And so that's kind of our hypothesis in this too. The other thing you have to look at, another unique example or the way to think about it is, DeFi took a while to take off. And then once the category was defined, it kind of exploded. But the business model behind DeFi is typically launching a governance token. And then the governance token is used to incentivize core contributors around the protocol and to work on different versions of it. And so the governance token is kind of the business model behind launching your own DeFi project. And NFTs found their own business model by just selling, JPEGs or one images or one videos, and so they found their business model initially by just selling a series of collections, and there's an IP play to that too. And so but the thing is, like, most businesses for the last 100 years were built off of just building revenue at the end of the day. And we've seen, SaaS-based revenue and recurring revenue really start to take off. And so the hypothesis that we kind of have is, okay, so those two use cases were took off because there was like a really good business model behind both of them. You could sell NFTs and sell the rights to the IP, and then you could also, launch your own governance token. And so that's why those use cases exploded. Well, the way we're thinking about it is, what does it look like when you can start to just give Devenue or recurring revenue to projects building on top? What kinds of businesses and projects can they build when they have something a little bit more sustainable that looks a little bit more like Web 2.0? Does that give them a business model and opportunity to monetize that they normally would not? And so Archway itself leans more best towards use cases that have a hard time monetizing, generally speaking. And so we see like projects around like Nomos that's building like multi-sig infrastructure on Archway, which historically multi-sigs have had a hard time monetizing. They haven't necessarily launched a governance token. They can't sell an NFT per se. But, just building smart contracts that get used by end users, they can start to pick up recurring revenue for usage of their smart contracts. And so that's one example of, where it really is a great fit for the Archway protocol, because you don't typically have like a legacy revenue or business model for yourself, and Archway kind of gives them one. We think of other infrastructure plays, whether that's oracles or indexing or any off-chain services that are coming onto Archway. All those kinds of things like benefit more infrastructure type plays tend to benefit a little bit better from this like recurring revenue model. And they are probably best drawn to the Archway community just because they've had a hard time figuring out how to monetize their projects in these use cases outside of on a traditional L1 that doesn't pay them.
No, that's really interesting. It's funny what you alluded to being sort of very Web 2, even though it's a Web 3 product. A couple times our co-founders have referred to us as fully Web 2.5, right? Like, because
Yeah.
I think that there's something to be said about capturing your history, your experience, the things that you've learned along the way that have led us to this precipice of the boom of Web3. And we know this is all going to change. So it's really interesting how you're taking sort of that Web 2 approach and thinking and applying it to Web 3, and blending them together to get that nice hybrid that will allow sort of sustainability for many builders in the space. And, I know that Archway is currently bringing in more builders. And is there any sort of hints that you want to drop about things that we may be seeing coming up on the Archway protocol and say, before the end of this year?
Yeah, there's a lot. So a lot of projects. So a lot of projects that are already in the Cosmos space are coming to deploy on top of Archway. I think one is like Calc Finance kind of comes to mind as one of the notable projects that will be deploying in the next couple of weeks. I'm told they're in the final testing. There's a project called Pina Colada, which is a Uniswap AMM type model that's coming on over. There's inside one of the core teams, we're launching an NFT marketplace. And so you're starting to see all kinds of use cases. There's tons of developers and a big, large pipeline of different use cases that are coming to Archway. A lot of the early stuff is the typical stuff you would see on other L1s, the copy version of the NFT or the DEX or whatever. But what's unique, I think, is what we're going to start to see is the devs customize what they do with the rewards, whether they redirect them back to their governance token holders in a form of like a dividend type distribution, whether they use the rewards to just pay the team, design it so that referrals happen so they can get larger and quicker network effects. And so I think you'll start to see that customization with, just the existing use cases as the first step.
Yeah, I would be remiss if I did not mention that obviously I'm involved in Archway as a community member. I'm a big fan of using the chain. I serve on the Liquidity Council. And so, I'm just a general fan of everything that you guys are building. I think the approach that you're taking is really the right one. We're seeing some, without naming names, other projects in the Cosmos ecosystem, for instance, come under great pressure, starting to collapse. And I think sort of that slow, steady approach is bringing the right builders over to the ecosystem. So, thinking about just emerging trends that we're starting to see in Web3, where do you see all of this going? Whether it's account abstraction, like how is Archway going to provide value moving forward in the years to come with the novel use case that you've created?
Yeah, we got some really exciting things in the pipeline, but I don't know if I can share it today, Ryan. Maybe you can have me on again. But we're very excited about account abstraction, obviously across the board. And what that means is one of the biggest frictions to onboarding users to the Web3 space is they typically have to download a wallet, memorize a seed phrase, understand what all this terminology is, figure out self-custody and everything else. And what we're seeing on the tech side is everything being abstracted away, so much so that you could probably just log in with a social login. There's third-party services that will help custody your keys in case you lose it, and just make the experience much, much better and a little bit more similar to like a Web 2.0 experience. That's one thing that we're kind of seeing take off. The other is obviously, I'm probably not sharing anything too new, but IBC and interchain accounts and interchain queries. The IBC ecosystem is about to be connected to, and within Cosmos is about to be connected to all the other L2s and L1s throughout the broader Web3 space. And so what that means is assets and contracts and everything else are going to be able to be triggered and moved across all from the Archway protocol. And so what you'll start to see is applications begin to abstract away the use cases even more and more and more. And you'll have one interface and you'll interact with Archway, and then you'll be interacting behind the scenes with an Optimism chain, or you'll be interacting with Ethereum itself or Solana behind the scenes. And you probably won't even realize that, like, if you're doing a trade, for instance, or a swap, that it's reaching out to a liquidity pool on Solana and then coming back, and it's all abstracted away and hidden. And so what's going to happen is, like, all these different chains that on one block space are really going to start to merge. It's like kind of creating a whole bunch of different accounting, bookkeeping ledgers that are all going to kind of come together, and you're going to see, sequential type transactions, like being triggered all across the place. And so I'm very excited for that. Just seeing interchain contracts and interchain queries across the board, and can't wait to see some of the use cases that kind of fall out from some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you and I were just both at ETH Denver, and one of the things that was a common sort of trope was abstraction, and then also just IBC seemed to be, as much as the composable labs guys love to say, IBC everywhere. And it just seemed to be a common theme, regardless of which ecosystem you were talking about, that this may be sort of the final interop solution that allows chains to just talk to each other seamlessly without having that bridge risk, because you're just doing the message passing and everything else like that. So, well, any closing thoughts that you have about, just Archway or the Web3 space in general, and then maybe any specific place you'd like people to reach out to you to learn more, Griffin?
Yeah, I'm very, very excited. I mean, I think we have a few more waves to go through in the Web3 space. I've been in it for a long time, but I think this next wave is probably where we start to garner a lot of institutional interest. And so I would expect, institutions to go probably beyond just Bitcoin, Ethereum, and maybe even beyond Solana, and start to really dive deeper into some of the other L1s and protocols and innovation. So I think this is one of those waves that we're going to see that. I think it's going to be one step too early where it's abstracted away at the payment level, and consumers are using payments across the board. But I think this next wave is going to get us one step closer to that. So I think we have a few more years to go, but I think over the next few years, everybody's going to be having, digital wallets and cryptocurrency, and going to be paying for their goods and services with these wallets, and transferring and transacting all over the place. And I still think it's a few years away, but I do think this next couple of years is going to really make some huge technical progress that's going to abstract everything away and make it easier for end consumers to use these chains. Yeah.
Awesome. Where's the best place for people to reach out and follow you?
Yeah, the best is two places. So you can go to the main website, which is archway.io, or you can check us out on Twitter, Archway HQ, and follow us, and keep up to date with all the things that are happening within the ecosystem.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to visit with us, Griffin. We really enjoyed having you on. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people who will love hearing about Archway and how you're doing things very differently. And for all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. And I'm sure we'll have another great guest for you on Decentral Lounge soon. Stay tuned.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.